Just this past weekend, we were able to witness the third and final bout of the long-awaited trilogy between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin. But more importantly, this fight was for undisputed, meaning that Canelo would put all of his championship belts on the line, and the victor of this bout, if it were to be Golovkin, would then reign as the new undisputed super middleweight champion of the world. Whereas for Canelo, he would have successfully defended his title since becoming undisputed at 168. To this current day, it would have been 5 years since their very first meeting in September 2017, which ended in a controversial draw for both fighters, and also marks 4 years since their second meeting, in which Canelo was awarded somewhat of a controversial majority decision back in September 2018. And quite a lot has changed since then, as both Canelo and Golovkin have seemed to go on divergent career paths altogether. Having 4 fights since then, in June of 2019, Triple G achieved a 4th round KO stoppage against Steve Rose, and in October of that year, Golovkin achieved a close unanimous decision against Sergey Derevianchenko to win the vacant IBF middleweight championship title. And in December 2020, Golovkin defended that title by a 7th round corner stoppage against Kamil Szeremeta. And being out of action throughout the whole of 2021, Golovkin returned in April of this year to defeat Ryota Murata in a unification bout, as he defended his IBF title and to also acquire the Super WBA middleweight championship title. Whereas for Canelo, he's only had 8 appearances since they last met. In December 2018, Canelo stopped Rocky Fielding by a 3rd round TKO stoppage to win the regular WBA super middleweight belt. And in May 2019, Canelo defended both his WBA super and WBC middleweight titles during a unification bout against the former IBF champion Daniel Jacobs, and won by a unanimous decision. And then jumping all the way to 175, Canelo made his first appearance as he crushed Sergey Kovalev by an 11th round KO to then win the WBO light heavyweight title. Now in December 2020, it was now back down to 168 as Canelo defeated Callum Smith in a lopsided victory to then win the WBA Super and also the vacant WBC title. In February of 21, Canelo defended those belts by a 3rd round stoppage against Anvi Yildirim, and then 3 months later in May, Canelo scored an 8th round stoppage to add the WBO super middleweight belt during his unification bout against Billy Joe Saunders. And then last November, Canelo became the most recent undisputed super middleweight champion as he crushed Caleb Plant by an emphatic 11th round knockout victory. And a few months ago in May, it was back up to 175, where Canelo challenged Dmitry Bivol for the Super WBA light heavyweight championship title, and unfortunately lost in a convincing 12th round unanimous decision in favour of the champion. And this was only Canelo's second official loss in his career, and his first loss since he was beaten by the great and now retired Floyd Mayweather Jr. nearly 10 years ago. Now, in the eyes of many, if not most observers, may strongly believe the trilogy to be highly controversial. Many fans believe Canelo was extremely fortunate by escaping his first bout with a highly contentious draw. Looking back to their first bout in 2017, Triple G was undefeated and was also the WBA Super, the WBC, and the IBF middleweight champion, whereas Canelo had the rightful claim as the lineal middleweight champion. And during their first bout, Canelo jumped out to an early lead by demonstrating his superior speed and overall reflexes, which gave him the advantage against his opponent, and was extremely calm and tactical with his approach to his defense, and was also able to counter effectively. While on the other hand, Golovkin seemed to have an uncharacteristically slow start, which is something we're not often used to seeing. It almost seemed as though Golovkin might have been overwhelmed by the sheer magnitude of the event, but Triple G finally began to find his groove within the middle rounds, where he established his jab and worked off the jab way more effectively compared to the opening rounds. Canelo still continued to box well and was still able to land some good counters against Golovkin, but even though Canelo didn't make himself an easy target with his reflexes and slippery footwork, Triple G at this point seized the momentum of the middle portions of the fight while landing much better shots. It was clear that once Golovkin established his effective fighting rhythm, Canelo had to exert much more energy with his footwork. Golovkin showed immense effort by being able to dictate the pace of the fight more often than not with good consistency. As the fight transpired, Golovkin maintained his efforts as both fighters showed their moments of action, but the overall bout proved to be extremely competitive on both sides. But in the eyes of the audience, many believed Triple G to be the clear winner of their first fight, while the official judges saw this to be otherwise, with the 2 judges scoring in favour of both fighters and the last judge in favour of a draw. And the official result ended by a split decision draw, and quite frankly, this outcome nowhere near reflected what truly transpired that night. We then fast forward a year into their second meeting in 2018, where during their first round, it looked as though both fighters were methodically picking their shots from the mid-range. Golovkin this time had a much better start by establishing his jab while getting into his boxing fighting groove much quicker than before, while Canelo was looking to stay at the mid-range to hopefully maintain his ground. Both fighters looked much more focused and landed effective shots all throughout the contest, and in many ways the flow and the momentum of the rematch felt eerily similar to their first encounter. It seemed as though Canelo was much more productive during the first half, whereas Golovkin seemed to be far more productive in the latter. Even despite this, it was still an extremely competitive matchup, and for this very reason it made it tremendously difficult to judge these scores objectively. And due to the efforts of both fighters, many rounds were extremely close, and so the scores could have literally gone either way. Despite this fight having a similar flow, the dynamics were far more different this time around, and I believe that on both sides this fight was a much better effort, with way more entertainment compared to their very first meeting. This bout was characterized with a higher sense of intensity and also aggression, where both fighters were dishing out punches while also being on the receiving end, and by the end of it, by majority decision, it was Canelo who walked away with the victory, with both judges scoring 115 to 113 for Canelo and the judge scoring 114 apiece for both fighters. And yet in controversial fashion to their first, many believe that Golovkin was robbed of a victory, or at least potentially a draw. We then arrived to their final bout in hope to put this rivalry as well as their trilogy to sleep, but to the surprise of the viewers watching, not much action went down during the opening half of the fight. Again, Triple G came into the fight with a much lower intensity and didn't look nearly as aggressive as before. This was characterized by showing little to no major activity on his part as well as being extremely hesitant, whereas Canelo seemed far more productive. Canelo's speed and his overall explosiveness proved far too overwhelming for Golovkin and was able to close the distance by landing multiple shots. Canelo further maintained this effort by occupying the middle of the ring and dictated the overall rhythm, and I believe the major difference this time around was Golovkin's inability to really establish his jab. It was certainly the case that in both their previous matches, Triple G's jab was the obvious difference maker. Not only would the jab prove to be extremely troublesome for Canelo, it would also act as a buffer to maintain the mid-range distance for Golovkin to operate, and so Triple G was much more hesitant to throw the jab because it would give Canelo the opportunity to work off it, as well as leaving himself open for multiple counters. As the fight progressed, Canelo began to slow down while Golovkin began to speed up. Both fighters traded shots where either fighter would be on the receiving end of tough counters. Triple G began to load up on more of his punches with much less hesitation during the final rounds, whereas Canelo stuck to his original plan by closing the distance and also by loading up on his power shots during the championship rounds. Despite making a final push at the end, Golovkin's effort was still nowhere near enough to make up for his underwhelming performance during the opening half, and by the end of it, all three judges scored the official bout 116 to 112 and 115 to 113 apiece in favor of a unanimous decision for Canelo Alvarez. Now finally, the well-anticipated trilogy between two of the greatest middleweights of this current generation had now finally come to an end, where we were able to witness Canelo Alvarez jump from multiple weight classes while also successfully contending for championships. Well, not every single one. And we also witnessed Gennady Golovkin still compete at a high level, and despite Father Time knocking on his door at just the age of 40, Golovkin was still able to give one of the greatest pound for pound fighters a run for his money. After witnessing how exactly the first two fights of the trilogy transpired, as well as hearing the thoughts and opinions of those within the entire boxing world, I then thought to myself, how exactly might these bouts compare to other controversial fights within history? There's no doubt we've seen fighters that were clearly cheated from their victories due to very questionable decisions, while on the other hand, we've also seen fighters that were victims of literally broad daylight robbery. And so was the Canelo Triple G trilogy the most controversial that we've seen? Well, I got the answer. Okay, here is a graphic that shows some of the most controversial decisions within recent history. To the left on the y-axis, we have the average number of rounds won in favor of the fighter that was robbed, while just above the x-axis, we have the percentage difference in the total number of successful punches thrown. And for clarification, I used an online community which allows users to post their personal scorecards for any given bout. In essence, users are able to exactly score each and every single round for any specific fight, whereas the CompuBot statistics simply compares the total number of punches that were accurately thrown, and employing these two approaches helps provide a more objective view in determining how badly a fighter may have been robbed. Here you will see fighters that were victims to highly questionable decisions. For instance, the bout between Manny Pacquiao and Timothy Bradley might potentially stand as the most controversial decision on this entire list. And during the first bout in June 2012, Pacquiao clearly dominated Bradley for the vast majority of the fight with his overwhelming quickness, fighting IQ, and raw punching power, while Bradley simply had no answer. Pacquiao led the CompuBox stats by landing 60% more total punches than Bradley, all the while winning an average of 10 rounds to just 2 rounds with a +8 difference in favor of the Filipino, and the judges officially scored the bout as a split decision in favor of Bradley. What a damn robbery. We then come about to the first bout between Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder back in December 2018, with Wilder reigning as the undefeated WBC champion and also with Fury returning back from his hiatus. This event may have been the most anticipated fight of that entire year. Despite Wilder achieving a couple of knockdowns during the fight, Tyson still masterfully outboxed Deontay throughout the entire duration of the fight. The CompuBox shows that Fury landed nearly 20% more total shots than Wilder, all the while winning an average of 9 total rounds, while achieving a +6 difference in favour of the Gypsy King. And by the end of it, the judges scored this contest as a controversial draw. And again, what a damn robbery. Literally within a solar system of its own, we have another controversial decision. Back in March of '99, the bout between Lennox Lewis and Evander Holyfield still remains today as a highly controversial result. This heavyweight slugfest was characterized with both fighters trading huge shots, and as the fight progressed, Lennox seized control and never looked back as he began to land huge shots after huge shots against Evander. Now it became extremely obvious to the audience as well as the sports commentators who clearly was in control of that fight. According to the punching stats, Lewis by the end of the fight had successfully landed 167% more total shots. In other words, Lewis nearly tripled the total number of punches that Holyfield threw, all the while winning an average of 10 total rounds while achieving a +8 difference. To the bewilderment of the boxing world, this scheduled contest was ruled as a draw. And I'll say again, what a damn robbery. Okay, back to the question at hand with regards to the most controversial decisions within recent history. Where exactly does the Canelo Triple G bouts rank on this list? Well, right about here. Still quite far from being one of the most controversial among this list, and contrary to popular belief, neither of their fights appear to suggest a clearly overwhelming difference with regards to their performances. Now take a look at the numbers during their first meeting. Without doubt, Canelo achieved a slightly higher total punching accuracy, whereas Golovkin took the edge in landing more successful jabs. And the same thing can also be said for their second meeting, where you'll see Canelo leading all 3 punching categories while successfully landing them at a slightly higher clip than Triple G. Although boxing fans may disagree on whether or not the victory was rightfully deserved or the fact that Golovkin was a victim of daylight robbery, a thing to truly remember is that the sport is unfortunately subjective, meaning that prejudgments, biases, and also individual opinions come into play with regards to its officiating. And I truly think that the sport has still got a very long way to go, but I believe that this change can happen due to not only shifting the approach to its officiating, but also its philosophy. Thank you all for tuning into this video. Don't forget to subscribe, and as always, I'll see you in the next one.